The test of any people is how they respond to a crisis, how they respond to the health challenge, the economic challenge, the social challenge, how they respond to what is, in this case, possibly the largest or the greatest global challenge in our lifetimes. And in Victoria's case, Victorians, when faced with a crisis from March onward, did the right thing. Almost all of the 6.7 million Victorians in this state did what was required. We stayed at home, we adhered to social distancing, we did what was asked of us, both from the federal government and the state government, and we kept to within the laws as they were presented. And in the mains that worked. And it did work. And our numbers fell, and they were enviable internationally when other countries looked at us and said, look at the Australian example. How has Australia managed to do so well out of this? And then came July. That little bit of hope that we all had when we put our kids back into school, and parents could go back to work, picking up the pieces of a month and a half, 2 months of shattered business, and in came July. 100 a day was a big deal in the first wave. And up comes 200 a day, 300, 400, up to 700 a day. And of course we asked the obvious question. How did it get to that? How did it get to that? How did the second wave, hence the bill we're debating today as a result of, how did it get to that? It got to that only in one part of Australia, only in Victoria. And only because of a failure in government policy. It wasn't because we just had bad luck. It's because those in charge failed us. The Premier failed us. The weapon-grade failure that is the Health Minister didn't even bother to take responsibility for her own failings. And as a consequence, hundreds of people have died. Hundreds of people have died. Hundreds of people, thousands of people got sick. Only in Victoria. Only in Victoria. So many kids have lost a huge part of their education. Whether it's year 12, year 11, grade 6, prep, even some in the union movement now saying the loss of kids' education and what they've gone through this year is catastrophic for them. But of course, for the government, it's not about that. For the government, it's not even about what's happened in the health situation. All of this to them is secondary. It's not about what's happening in business. It's not about the failures we're seeing in mental health, the extreme and desperate calls we're getting from people in our electorates who are on their knees with a mental health crisis that is gripping the second largest city in Australia, home to 1 in 5 Australians. For the government, it's a PR problem first. It's a PR problem. It's all about the PR. It's all about the Premier's image. It's all about I stand with Dan. It's not about Victorians. And if anything characterises the soul of this government, it's the fact that they see this more than anything as a PR problem and not as a problem that is destroying our state, our economy, our mental health, our children's education. It's a PR problem. That's how Labor sees it. Walking into someone's house and arresting them for their thought, for having a different point of view, crazy as it may seem to most of us, but arresting them in front of their children, handcuffing them, dragging them out of their own home. The government comes out this morning and says, quote unquote, we think we got the PR wrong. I kid you not. Because it's all about public relations. Is there a hashtag I stand with Anastasia? I stand with Mark McGowan. I stand with Stephen Marshall. No. Listen, mate, if brains were taxed, you'd get a refund.
this is not the time for you to be interjecting, brother. I think you should just calm down and listen, because at this point in time, the state is on its knees, and the weapon-grade idiocy we get from people like this, I don't even know where you're the member for, but I'm sure you won't be there next time. But what I do know, Mr Speaker, is that this state is on its knees. And the morons we get in this government who blame everyone else, they blame Victorians. They blamed hospital workers. They tried to blame the federal government. They even tried to blame overseas governments. They blame everyone but themselves. Take some responsibility for what is happening in this state, for what they're doing to our children, to our elderly. Take some responsibility. We say to the Premier, no. Oh, no. He's more interested in what he tweets. He's more interested in what he puts on Facebook, because for the Premier of this state, it's about him. The whole show's about him. His government's about him. It's not about them. These backbenchers and co, they're passengers. It's all about him. It's always ever been about him. It's not about anyone else. And that is the problem we have in Victoria, that the Premier of the state today sees this all about him and his legacy and his image. And that's why we've got a problem that we do, because he wouldn't accept support from the federal government when it was offered, because that would not be befitting with his masculinity to say, oh no, I'll take someone else's help, because it's all about him, because Dan the man can solve everything he thinks. And solve it he did not. Create a problem he did, that we're all paying for, that our economy will pay for decades. The megalomania, the egomaniac, the grab for power, all this stuff would leave General Stroessner in Paraguay or Erich Honecker in East Germany proud, because it's crazy. There still has not been a single reason uttered in this parliament why we need to give a mid-range health official the ability to shut the parliament down. No one has walked in here and said, this is the reason why. We're operating quite fine today under strict conditions. We have question time today under strict conditions. The media can report this parliament under strict conditions. Why do we need to shut the place down? We need to shut the place down because the Premier of the day does not want an opposition. He wants an audience, because it's all about him. It's all about his ego. It's always ever been about his ego. And the passengers on his backbench just blindly follow like the sheep they are, at the expense of Victorians, at the expense of our economy, our mental health, our children's future, the deaths of hundreds of elderly people. But the Labor Party couldn't care less, because it's all about them. It's all about their image. This bill will do nothing to help solve a COVID crisis in Victoria. This bill does nothing to help solve it. All this bill does is allow the Premier to bully yet another departmental official into shutting down yet another form of criticism upon him. And this is what bullies do. They shut down anyone else criticising or questioning their point of view. We've seen that with this guy for now nearly 6 years. Where do we need to start? From the CFA, from volunteers, from school kids. Ask Minister Foley. I mean, any criticism. These people just shut it down. This is yet another example of that. Why do we give a mid-range bureaucrat the power to shut the parliament down? What a ridiculous idea. The parliament sat during the Blitz in London, but it can't sit with social distancing operations in Melbourne 2020. That's because it's all about Andrews. It's all about his ego and the preciousness of the man that he might get questioned. It's no wonder, for the first time seriously in nearly 6 years, his own backbencher openly saying, we wish he'd go. I don't think they're alone. So who's going to inherit the smoking ruin that he's going to bequeath them? Because it will be a smoking ruin. Kane and Kerner demolished the economy. This guy's demolished the economy, confidence, people's health, people's lives. He's going to leave as a legacy, not level crossings. He's going to leave the greatest public health catastrophe in Australia's history that demolished 2.5 decades of economic confidence. Will he leave it for Jacinta? Will he leave it for Martin if he gets the shaver out? Will he leave it for Jill, or will he leave it to James Merlino? Whoever he leaves for, he couldn't care. because it's not about them or Labor or their legacy. It's always been about the Premier and his trades hall buddies. That is why we're in the mess we're in. I oppose this bill. I oppose giving this Premier, his hopeless ministers and his weapon-grade failure of a government any more power. Yeah.